There is something you have been doing your entire life. Not consciously, not with intention. But every single day, in the way you wake up, in the way you carry yourself through a room, in the way you react when things fall apart, you have been sending a signal. The question was never how to speak to the universe. The question, the one nobody asks, is whether you've been saying what you actually mean. Most people spend their lives shouting into the sky, waiting, hoping, begging. And the silence they get back feels like absence. But what if it isn't? What if the universe has been listening the entire time? And the problem isn't that it can't hear you, but that it understands you far better than you understand yourself. This is not a video about manifestation. This is not about rituals or frequency or asking for things. This is about the only language the universe has ever responded to, and why most people never learn to speak it. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that speaking means using words. Pray with the right words, think the right thoughts, say the right affirmations in the right order at the right time of day. And so we became obsessed with the script. We rehearsed what we wanted. We wrote it down in journals. We visualized it in the morning before the world woke up. We whispered it into the dark before sleep. And still, nothing. Or at least, not what we asked for. What we missed was something so fundamental that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Words are the surface of communication. They are the foam on top of the ocean. Beneath the words is tone, beneath tone is feeling, beneath feeling is belief, and beneath belief, there is something older. Something that doesn't have a name in any language we've invented yet. Call it your state, call it your being, call it the frequency at which your entire life is quietly vibrating when nobody, including you, is paying attention. That is what the universe reads. Not your prayers, not your vision board, not the gratitude list you wrote on a Tuesday morning because someone on the internet told you it would change your life. Your state. Think about the last time something truly good happened to you. Not something you forced, not something you planned down to the last detail and white-knuckled into existence. Something that arrived, something that showed up in a way you didn't expect through a door you didn't even know was there. Now think about where you were inside yourself when that happened. Most people, when they sit with this honestly, notice something uncomfortable. They weren't trying very hard, they had, in some quiet way, let go. Not given up. That's different. Giving up is a kind of violence you do to yourself. Letting go is softer. It's the moment you stop gripping the outcome so tightly that you can finally feel your own hands again. That softness, that particular quality of open, grounded presence, that is a language, and the universe is fluent in it. There is a concept in physics that most people have heard of, but very few have actually sat with. The observer effect, the idea that the act of observation changes what is being observed. Scientists discovered this while studying particles at the quantum level, that matter behaves differently depending on whether or not it is being watched. Now, I'm not going to tell you that quantum physics proves manifestation. That's a shortcut that cheapens both science and wisdom. But I will ask you to sit with the metaphor because there is something true in it that lives beyond the laboratory. The way you observe your life changes your life, not metaphorically, literally. The person who wakes up every morning and sees evidence of lack, who scans the horizon for what's missing, what's wrong, what hasn't arrived yet. That person is not neutral. They are not simply reporting reality. They are participating in its construction. And the person who wakes up and notices really notices. The quality of light through a window, the warmth of something small, the fact that they're still here, still breathing, still capable of being surprised. That person is also participating differently. This is where most conversations about speaking to the universe go wrong. They tell you to fake it, smile when you don't feel like smiling. Think positive, pretend the pain isn't there, act as if. And that advice is not just ineffective, it is a kind of self-abandonment. Because the universe, whatever you believe it to be, is not fooled by performance. It reads beneath the performance. It reads the thing you do with your jaw when you're trying to seem fine. It reads the way your shoulders carry 10 years of unfinished grief. It reads the story you tell yourself at 3 a.m. when the noise of the day finally goes quiet, and there is nothing left to distract you from yourself. That story, the one you've never said out loud to anyone, that is your truest transmission. And until you learn to change that story, not suppress it, not rewrite it with affirmations, but actually transform it from the inside, you will keep sending the same signal and wonder why you keep receiving the same answer. The only way to speak to the universe is to become someone whose entire being says something true. Not something perfect. Not something healed beyond recognition. Something true. That is where we begin.
There is a version of you that exists before you open your mouth. Before the words, before the smile you put on when someone asks how you're doing. Before the careful, curated answer you've rehearsed so many times it no longer feels like a performance. That version of you is already speaking constantly. The terrifying thing is that this version of you is far more honest than the one you show the world. It carries everything you've tried to leave behind, every disappointment you decided not to feel, every door you close before you let yourself grieve, every version of yourself you abandoned because the world told you it wasn't practical enough. That residue doesn't disappear, it settles. Into the body, into the posture, into the particular way you hesitate before accepting something good. As if some part of you is already preparing for it to be taken away. That hesitation is a transmission, and the universe receives it before you've even finished the thought. There was a study, decades ago, that most people have never heard of. Researchers wanted to understand how much of human communication is carried by words alone. What they found unsettled the field. Words account for only a fraction of what we communicate. The rest is carried by tone, by posture, by micro-expressions that flicker across a face in less than a second. We continue to think the words of a prayer, the items on a list, the vision carefully constructed in the mind, that these are the message. They are not. They are the surface. The message is everything underneath. Think about someone you've met, maybe once, briefly, who walked into a room and changed the temperature of it. Not because they said anything remarkable, because of something they carried. A quality of presence you couldn't name but couldn't ignore. You felt settled near them, or seen, or, for reasons you couldn't explain, that everything was going to be okay. That is the highest form of communication available to a human being, and it works the same way with the universe. The people whose lives seem to move with quiet grace, who seem to be standing exactly where they need to be when the door opens. They are not lucky, they are legible. Their inner state and their outer life are telling the same story. No performance layered over pain, no smile stretched across an unexamined wound. They are coherent. And coherence, that alignment between what lives inside you and what you send into the world, is the only real fluency in the language the universe speaks. But here is the part almost never said. Coherence is not happiness. It is not having everything figured out. It is simpler than that and harder. It is the willingness to be exactly where you are. To stop sending mixed signals, wanting one thing while believing you deserve another. Asking for love while carrying a story that says you are hard to love. Reaching for abundance while a voice in the basement of your mind whispers that people like you don't get to have that. The universe doesn't punish you for those contradictions. It simply reflects them with extraordinary precision. This is why the outer life so often feels like an echo of something internal you haven't fully faced. Not because you were being punished, not because you were broken, but because the signal you were sending is split, one part of you reaching forward, another part pulling back. And in that invisible war between what you want and what you believe you're allowed to have, the message gets lost. Not in the universe, in you. The work is not about learning new words. It is about learning to send one clear signal. And that begins with something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Honest stillness. The kind of quiet where you stop negotiating with yourself long enough to hear what you actually believe. Not what you've been told to believe, what you actually, beneath all the noise, believe to be true about yourself and what you deserve. Because that belief, quiet, unspoken, bolder than any affirmation you've ever repeated, is the message the universe has been receiving all along.
We live in a civilization that has declared war on silence. Not openly, but look at the evidence. The moment you sit in a waiting room, you reach for your phone. The moment a conversation ends, music fills the car. The moment you wake up, the notifications begin. We have engineered an entire world around the avoidance of stillness, and we call it productivity. We call it connection. But underneath the noise we curate and the busyness we perform, there is something we are afraid to face: ourselves. Not the self we present, the self that exists in the silence. The one with the unfinished thoughts, the one with the grief that never got a proper burial. The one with the question it stopped asking, because the answer was too uncomfortable. That self is not broken, but it is waiting. The ancient traditions knew something about this that we have largely forgotten. Every serious spiritual practice in human history, from the desert fathers to the Zen monasteries, from vision quests to silent retreats, begins with the same instruction. Be still, not as a warm-up, as the practice itself. Because the people who built these traditions understood something modern life has dismantled. You cannot hear anything real while you are running. We've mistaken the motion for the meaning. We've confused the busyness for a life. There is a particular quality of silence most people have only touched briefly. Maybe at the edge of sleep. Maybe in the aftermath of something that broke you open. For just a moment, everything went quiet. And in that quiet, something was there. Not a voice, not a vision, just a quality of presence. A sense, fleeting and impossible to hold, that you are not alone in your own existence. Most people feel this once or twice in a lifetime and spend years trying to get back to it through the wrong doors. Through substances that promise transcendence and deliver only distance, through relationships entered not to connect, but to escape the sound of their own thoughts.
The door was never out there, it was always the same door. The one that opens inward, the one that requires you to stop, fully stop, and sit with whatever rises. But sitting with what rises is not comfortable. Sometimes it is grief. Sometimes it is anger so old it has fossilized. Sometimes it is a loneliness so fundamental it feels like it predates this lifetime. The instinct is to reach for something to make it stop. The phone, the food, the drink, the project. But here is what nobody tells you about that signal. It is not your enemy. It is your most honest messenger. The discomfort that rises in stillness is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is evidence that something true in you has been waiting to be acknowledged. And the universe cannot work with what you refuse to feel. It can only work with what you are willing to be honest about. This is the part the self-help industry skips. It's much easier to sell a morning routine than this. Sit down. Don't reach for anything. Let whatever is there be there. Don't fix it. Don't turn it into content. Just let it exist in your presence. Because your presence, your full, undistracted, honest presence, is the most powerful thing you have ever had access to. The universe doesn't need your words. It needs your presence, real presence. The kind that can only exist in stillness. The kind that requires you to stop performing, even for yourself, and simply be the thing you are. Unfinished, unresolved, honestly here. Because it is only from that place that anything real can be sent, and anything real can arrive. Most people never go there. They mistake the discomfort for a stop sign. It was never a stop sign. It was always an invitation.
I want to tell you about a man named Howard. Not a philosopher, not a teacher, not someone you've heard of. A man who spent 31 years as an engineer in a city he didn't choose, in a marriage that had gone quiet in the way that marriages go quiet, when two people have stopped believing that the other one can really see them. Every morning for 31 years, Howard drove the same road, past the same gas station, past the same school where children who were now adults had once learned to read, past a field that in spring filled with something yellow he never once stopped to identify. He was not unhappy. He told me he was something worse. He was absent. Present in body, absent in signal sending. Every single day, the message that all of this, was simply what a life was. And the life agreed. It reflected back exactly what he transmitted. Nothing wrong. Nothing right. Nothing. Until the morning his car wouldn't start. Not dramatically, the engine just didn't. And Howard sat in a driveway in October and, for the first time in 31 years, did not go anywhere. He sat for 4 hours. He told me he didn't know why he didn't just call a cab. I think he does know. I think some part of Howard had been waiting 31 years for exactly this. For the machinery of his life to fail completely enough that the silence had nowhere left to hide. What happened in that driveway changed nothing on the outside. He got the car fixed, he drove to work, he came home. But something in the signal changed, something quiet and permanent and impossible to undo.
2 years later, Howard was living 3 states away, painting landscapes of fields he finally stopped to look at. He never manifested that, he never visualized it. He never said the right words into the right frequency at the right time of night. He just finally went still and let what was true in him be louder than what was expected of him. That is the only alchemy that has ever worked.
There is a moment that most people experience at least once, and almost nobody talks about it honestly. It happens after the struggle, after the years of trying and failing and trying again with slightly different levels of desperation. It happens after you have exhausted every version of effort you know how to perform. And it arrives not with a thunderclap, it arrives quietly. Like a door you've been pressing against for years, suddenly, without warning, swinging open from the other side. And you realize you weren't pushing it open. You were holding it shut. This is the moment that changes everything. Not because something outside of you shifted, but because something inside of you, finally, after years of resistance, stopped. Stopped arguing, stopped negotiating, stopped constructing explanations for why things couldn't be different. And in that stopping, in that moment of genuine surrender, the signal changed. Something underneath it all changed, the static cleared, and for the first time what you were sending and what you actually believed were the same thing. Psychologists have a name for the state that precedes genuine change, the pre-contemplative stage, when a person is still invested in the story of why change isn't possible for them. The part of us that wants things to be different is more committed than we'd like to admit to being right about why they can't be. Because being right is safe. It means the failure belongs to circumstance, to timing, to other people. Being right means you never have to face the more terrifying possibility that you had more power than you were using, that the life you wanted was closer than you allowed yourself to believe. There is a man who spent decades studying consciousness who said something that has stayed with me. He said, "The strongest force in the human personality is the need to remain consistent with how we define ourselves. Not love, not fear, not ambition. The need to remain consistent with how we define ourselves." Which means every belief you hold about who you are, every unexamined conviction about what you deserve, what is possible for someone like you, is not just a thought. It is a gravitational field. It pulls experience toward it. It shapes what you notice and what you overlook. You are not a passive recipient of your life. You are its architect. And the blueprints are the beliefs you've never once sat down to question. This is where the conversation about speaking to the universe becomes something entirely different. It stops being about technique. It becomes a question. Who do you believe you are? Not who you were told you were, not who you perform yourself to be. Who do you believe, in the basement of your being, that you actually are? Because that belief is your loudest transmission, louder than any prayer. And until it changes, everything else is just noise. The moment everything changes is not dramatic. It arrives as something quieter. A loosening like a fist you've been holding so tightly you forgot it was clenched. And then, for reasons you can't fully explain, you open it. And what you were holding so desperately turns out to be nothing. Just air. Just the ghost of a fear that needed your grip to stay alive. And in that small,
private, unremarkable moment, you become someone the universe can finally reach. Not because you said the right thing, but because you stop being in the way of yourself. And that, only that, is when the conversation truly begins.
Most people imagine that speaking to the universe is an act of transmission. You send, it receives, you project a desire outward and wait for the response to arrive from somewhere out there. But what if that model is backwards? What if the universe has been speaking first, and the only practice that has ever mattered is learning to listen? Not listening the way we listen to a conversation, not with the ears that are trained to catch what is familiar, but listening the way the body listens, the way your hand knows before your mind catches up that something is wrong, the way a room can feel different before a single word has been spoken. That kind of listening, the kind that happens below thought. There is a word in Japanese, ma, with no direct translation in English. It refers to the pause, the space between the silence that exists not as the absence of sound, but as something with its own substance and meaning. In Japanese aesthetics, ma is not empty. It is where meaning lives. The space between the notes is what makes music possible. The pause between words is what gives language its weight. We have built an entire civilization around filling the ma, making sure the space is never quiet enough that something might be heard that we didn't choose to hear. But the people who have learned to listen, really listen, describe the same thing across cultures and centuries. They describe a quality of information that arrives not as words or visions, but as a knowing, a sense of direction that doesn't come from reasoning but precedes it, a pull, gentle but unmistakable, toward something the logical mind cannot justify, but the deeper self recognizes instantly. We have many names for this intuition, instinct, grace, because you have felt it. Every person alive has felt it at least once. And the question worth sitting with is this: how many times did you listen? And how many times did you override it with the opinion of someone whose approval you needed more than your own truth? The universe speaks in the language of that knowing, not in coincidences arranged for your entertainment. It speaks in the quiet pull, in the thing that keeps returning no matter how many times you push it away, in the inexplicable peace that settles over you in the presence of one thing, and the resistance that rises in the presence of another. That is the conversation. It has always been the conversation. This is harder than it sounds, because listening means accepting the answer might not be what you wanted. It might point you away from the safe thing, away from the life you've spent years constructing, because it made sense on paper, even if it never felt like home. The universe is not cruel in its answers, but it is honest, and honesty, when you've been living inside a comfortable story, can feel like destruction. It is not destruction. It is clarity, and clarity, even when it costs you something, is always an act of love. So what does it mean to finally listen? It means moving through the world slowly enough to notice, quietly enough to hear, honestly enough to act on what you receive, even when it frightens you. It means treating your own inner life with the same seriousness you give to everything outside of you. Because the inner life is not decoration. It is the source.
Everything that has ever entered your outer world passed through it first. And here is what changes when you finally hear. Not the world, not immediately. What changes first is something interior. A settling like sediment in water, finally allowed to be still. And in that clarity, you begin to see something you couldn't see before. Not the future, something simpler. The next step, just one. Offered not as a grand revelation, but as a quiet nudge from something that has been waiting, with extraordinary patience, for you to stop running long enough to receive it. That nudge, that quiet, unhurried, unmistakable nudge, is the universe speaking. It always has been.
There is a story that has existed in almost every culture that has ever tried to make sense of what it means to be human. It goes by different names. It is told around different fires and different languages under different skies. But the structure is always the same. Someone leaves. They leave the familiar and walk into something larger, something uncertain, something that demands from them everything they thought they were and gives back in return something they could not have imagined. And then they return. Not to the same place, the geography might be identical, but they return different, carrying something that cannot be named but can be felt by everyone in the room. We have always told this story because it is the only story. The leaving, the wandering, the return. You have been on this journey. Perhaps it chose you, through loss, through rupture, through some moment of undoing so complete that the life you've been living simply stopped being available to you. And you found yourself in the wilderness of yourself, without the usual certainties to hold on to, without the version of yourself you'd spent years constructing. Stripped of all of it, standing in a silence you didn't choose but couldn't escape. And something happened there, something quiet and irreversible. You began, slowly, imperfectly, with tremendous resistance, to listen. Not to the voices outside. You began to listen to something else, something that had been there the entire time, patient and undemanding, waiting for you to become quiet enough to hear it. You are not the same person who pressed play. I know that because I know what this conversation does to people. Not because it gives answers, but because it asks the question that most people spend their lives arranging around not having to ask. And if you're still here, that means something. It means you are someone who stays. You already practice it. You just didn't know that's what it was called. If this channel is a place you want to return to, subscribe to Zen, and if this is for you, come back. We go deeper every time. Leave a comment below, something true, something you'd only say in the dark to someone you completely trust. Now back to where we were, because there is one thing left, the hardest thing. Coming back is not simple, because the world you return to has not changed. And there is a temptation to slip back into the old shape, to speak the old language, perform the old role, because it is easier than explaining you are no longer the same person who left. This is where most transformations quietly die, not in the wilderness, but in the return, in the moment when the easier thing and the true thing diverge, and you have to choose. The choice is not made once, it is made every morning, in the first moments of waking, before the noise begins. There is a window, brief, easily missed, where you can choose again to
be the person the wilderness made you. Most days you will reach for comfort. It is not failure, that is being human. But some days you will choose differently. You will sit for a moment in the quiet. You will listen before you speak, for the thing underneath the noise. And from that small, daily, quietly radical act of return, you will send something into the world that no ritual has ever been able to manufacture. Something true, something the universe cannot ignore. Because this is what the return teaches, that speaking to the universe was never about learning a new language. It was about remembering the one you already knew. Before the world taught you to be afraid of your own signal, you are not learning something new. You are returning to something ancient, something that has been waiting for you to find your way back.
You already know. That is the thing nobody says at the end of a conversation like this. After all the philosophy, all the metaphor, all the circling and retreating and approaching again, the conclusion is not a conclusion. It is a recognition. You already know. Not intellectually deeper than that, in the place that existed before you had language for it. In the part of you that has never once been confused about what is true, only afraid of what being honest about it would cost. The only way to speak to the universe is not a technique. It is not something you learn. It is something you return to. Again and again. Every time the world presses in with its demands and its insistence that your worth is conditional and your life is a problem, to be optimized rather than a mystery to be inhabited. Every time you reach for something outside yourself to fill a silence that was never empty, you return to the stillness, to the signal, to the version of yourself that exists beneath the performance. There is nothing wrong with you. Let that land for a moment, not as reassurance, as a literal statement of fact. The life that hasn't arrived yet is not evidence of your inadequacy. The silence you've received in response to everything you've sent skyward is not indifference. It is an invitation to go deeper, to send something truer, and to trust, not blindly, but with the trust available only to people who have been broken open and discovered that something survived, that the universe is not withholding from you. It is waiting for you. The mystics knew this. They sat in caves and deserts for years, not to escape the world, but because they understood it required that kind of stillness to see clearly. They knew the universe was not a vending machine, that it was something more like a mirror. Vast, patient, precise, reflecting back. Not what you asked for, but what you are. And they understood the only practice that ever mattered was not about changing the mirror. It was about becoming someone whose reflection they could bear to look at, someone whose inner life and outer life told the same story. You have been that person in moments. In the unexpected stillness of a Tuesday morning. In the moment just before sleep, when something true surfaces briefly, before the mind pulls it back under. In those moments, you were speaking, and something heard you.
It always does. This is not the end of anything. There is no arrival point. There is only the practice. The daily, imperfect, human practice of returning to yourself, of choosing, again and again, the true thing over the comfortable thing. Not because it is easy, but because it is the only way to live that doesn't cost you. The deepest part of yourself. There is a field somewhere. You may have driven past it 1,000 times. In spring, it fills with something yellow. You never stopped to find out what it was called. That field is not waiting for you to be ready. It is simply there. The way you are, simply there. Underneath everything you've built on top of yourself. The universe doesn't need you to arrive. It needs you to stop. Just once. Long enough to hear the thing that has been trying to reach you since before you had a name for what you were looking for. You already know what it sounds like. You've heard it before. It sounds like nothing. And it sounds like everything. It has been speaking to you in the only language it has ever known. Since the very beginning. You were never not in conversation. You were only ever learning to listen. If this reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Senend and leave a comment below. Tell me something true. I'll be here.